Hello everyone, this is part 12 of What If Naruto Was Trained by Black Zetsu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Maybe after this mission, I'll. Yamanaka Ino let that thought trail off as she refocused her attention to the task at hand. Extracting information could be a very delicate procedure, depending on the mental wards the target possessed, and so the concentration required to do so varied with the individual. Fortunately, none of the Otonin whose memories she was rooting through had any strong blockades. Orochimaru seemed to prefer training his foot soldiers in quantity rather than quality, but what she was seeking was so specific that she was afraid she might miss it as she was filtering through the information. Next, she thought, moving on to the last sound shinobi and trying to keep her mind on the mission. Still, it was far past the time when she should have done something. Hell, she'd been more active in pursuing Sasuke as a preteen than she had with Naruto over the almost 4 years they'd been friends. Not that that had ever yielded any results. Ino couldn't say for sure when it had happened, just that it had. At some point since Naruto had become a member of Team 10, the blonde had slowly become more dear to her, and not in the protective way she felt concern for Shikamaru and Choji, but as a gradual creep of more than friendly intrigue. She'd become enamored with him, a fact that had become glaringly more apparent upon learning of Tenten's involvement in his life. Her past rivalry with Sakura had given her enough perspective and candor to understand the bitter feeling of jealousy welling in her breast. If she'd been younger, when she'd been younger, she might have acted impulsively on her feelings. But with age came experience, and if there was one thing she'd learned about Naruto over the years, it was that his dislike for Sasuke hadn't ebbed since the days in the academy. In fact, as the two blondes had become friends and the younger one had dealt with Ino's infatuation with the Uchiha, Naruto had only seemed to grow more incensed with his former teammate. His dislike seemed weird, since Naruto's personality had slowly shifted to reflect the Uchiha's aloof studiousness, but Ino supposed that people were blindest to their own faults. If it wasn't for the idea that her teammate seemed to be disinterested in the fairer sex, Ino might have thought that his frustration with Sasuke stemmed from her own interest in the dark-haired boy, especially since Naruto now possessed many of the attractive qualities she'd originally seen, or wanted to see, in the Uchiha. Fortunately, years of working with the blonde had dissuaded her from the notion that he'd changed himself to try and get her attention. If that had been the reason, Naruto would have taken advantage of the subtle hints she'd been dropping recently. Still, it would have been a solid strategy to get her attention, and Ino was hard-pressed to deny that the similarities between the two weren't at least partially at play. For her interest in her teammate, she wasn't still naive enough to believe that she loved him, like she had with Sasuke, at least not yet. But Ino also admired her teammate's drive, his ingenuity. She would have never thought anyone but Nara could take over Shikamaru's spot on Team 10, but he'd done it, the way they could bounce off each other, stubbornness and gardening and all. 3 senbon flew past her field vision and buried themselves around the heart of a suddenly awake Otonin. A flash of forest green and yellow found Naruto burying one of his hunting knives in the stunned shinobi's ribcage. He craned his neck in her direction and offered her an embarrassed look. Whoops. Guess this guy had some resistance. His companion rolled her eyes. Great. Hey, it happens. His features relaxed into something resembling concern. You okay? Ino nodded, returning her attention to the Otonin whose memories she was scanning and trying to ignore the way her heart seemed to beat extra loudly. The blonde's intervention had saved her life, not for the first time, and she wasn't sure if the pounding in her breast was from the neutralized threat or the male beside her. Yeah, he didn't touch me. Didn't even get close, thanks to you. Thanks. From her periphery, she caught Naruto bob his head once before moving along to each of the downed sound shinobi and checking them for any further surprises. Ino let out a soft sigh and returned to her work. Then there were the moments like that, where Naruto looked out for her and protected her, but didn't say anything about it, not like her other teammates would. Shikamaru typically complained about intervening on her behalf, or watching over her body while she was using the Shintention, though nowadays it was probably more out of habit or because he had to do work rather than because of her. Choji was the opposite. chivalrous in a guileless sort of way with how he watched out for her. Naruto did none of that. He simply did what he felt he had to do, and barely made a comment if it inconvenienced him, like some sort of stoic white knight. For a long time, she'd suspected that he did it to settle the score of all the moments when she'd bandaged him up after a fight, but he typically preferred teasing her about some personal thing to lording his savior status over her head. She wasn't stupid enough to think that part of why he did it wasn't connected to the missions they ran, but some part of her hoped, really, that it was also because they had a bond he didn't want to lose. Ino didn't know of any other guys, aside from her father, who were as interested in flowers and plants as Naruto was, or who could tolerate the foolhardiness and flightiness of her younger self and come through the other side of puberty as close friends, and those qualities were endearing. Neither of them were the preteens of their academy days, and through the growth, they'd both changed to mesh with each other. And yet, despite all the positives, Ino knew that Naruto was hiding some inner darkness that she wasn't privy to. It made him reclusive, withdrawn, careful with what he said or did, nothing like the loud, attention-seeking child of their youth. She hadn't missed the way his smiles always seemed forced when it came to Yamanaka Flowers customers, or his distinct shortage of friends, and the way his personality had slowly morphed to reflect some manner of Sasuke's was unusual. There were ways of finding out, of course, especially as a Yamanaka, but she'd broken their bond once, back when she'd ignored him at their first Chunin exams. She wouldn't do it again by using her clan abilities to suss out his secret. Her only hope was that he would choose to confide whatever he was hiding in her, and perhaps they could work through it together. Wait, got something. Good. Ino looked up to find him standing over her, the knives in his hand dripping with blood. All around them, the throats of the sound shinobi had been slit, leaving rivulets of red running out onto the floor of the crude hideout. She backed away as he knelt and did the same to her victim. When he stood again and faced her, his blue eyes were emotionless. Let's blow this place. She followed him as they left and took off for the surrounding trees, the last look of apathy in his eyes making her even more curious as what he was keeping secret. It was cliché, but Ino hoped that she could heal the heaviness in his heart before he truly did become like Sasuke, the boy who ignored everyone and stayed ardently away from those who cared about him, even if that only applied to Sakura. The platinum blonde steeled her resolve. When we get back, I'll do it when we get back. LLL. Oto is trying to expand into the land of hot water. Jiraiya cupped his chin in thought. You're sure about this? Ino shrugged. As sure as I can be, Hokage-sama. It seems like Oto has been sending small squads of shinobi there for some reason. It would explain why there have been sightings of Oto-nin close to the border recently. There's supposed to be some sort of shipment between Oto and you in the next week or so. The Toad-sanin waved off the somewhat apologetic lilt of her report. It's fine. I don't expect Orochimaru would have trusted that much info to his underlings. You did a fine job, Ino-chan. You, too, kid, he added, sparing a glance at Naruto. Was that everything you found out? Yes, Hokage-sama. All right, you're free to go. Both blondes bowed to the older man before departing his office, heading down the steps in amicable silence. Naruto blinked in the bright sunlight that struck his eyes upon exiting the Hokage Tower, raising a hand to shield him from the rays. They walked in silence for several minutes until they found a shady part of town. Naruto dropped his hand from his forehead and commented, "Well, that whole thing was easier than I thought." Ino rolled her eyes. Yeah, if you consider singling out the leader of a squad of Oto-nin, searching for any clue as to something suspicious related to Oto, which, by the way, is everything, and not dying in the process easy, then sure, piece of cake. You don't. It got hectic after the third time. Hey, we survived, didn't we? Barely, Ino muttered. Louder, but tone sincere, she continued, but thanks, for watching my back. It's what I'm here for, you know, when Shikamaru's not busy diplomating with Suna or diplomating. Yeah, or whatever he calls what he does with that blonde chick. You do realize that diplomating isn't a word, right? He's either being a diplomat or practicing diplomacy, not diplomating. Naruto waved off her correction with a careless gesture. Whatever, you know what I meant. I know that you're an idiot, Ino shot back without heat, and that this is totally beside the point. Look, I just wanted to say thanks. She hesitated briefly before continuing on, a softer expression overtaking her features. Do you want to go out sometime? You don't owe me anything. No, not for that. Naruto paused in his path, turning around to better examine his companion. Ino wasn't looking directly at him, a shy, almost tentative expression hovering in her averted, baby blue eyes. He was reminded distinctly of the moment she'd stood in his newly decorated apartment and hugged him, relief and a sentimentality he hadn't been able to define in those same eyes. As a date, she continued, some of her usual confidence returning, one pair of blue eyes finding another. Will you go on a date with me? Naruto blinked, momentarily thunderstruck at the notion. In his younger years, he might have jumped at the opportunity to go on a date with someone as attractive as Ino, although he probably would have been more excited if said someone was Sakura. Now, he had no idea how to respond. The notion seemed so foreign that he was flabbergasted it had even been posed. Fortunately, he was saved from having to reply by the sudden appearance of an Anbu operative. Both blondes started at the shinobi's arrival. Uzumaki-san, Hokage-sama requests your presence. Again, whatever. He spared Ino a hesitant glance. We'll talk later. Sounds good, later. He blurted, activating a shunshin and disappearing from view. The body flicker deposited him outside the Hokage's office, and Naruto took a moment to breathe a silent sigh of relief. He hadn't had an answer for Ino because he hadn't really expected such a scenario to arise. His blonde friend was vocal about her feelings, or at least had been when the target of her affections had been Sasuke, and the idea that anyone could want to go out with him when all his actions were guided by selfishness was ludicrous. Naruto wasn't even sure he had the emotional capacity to partake in something as involved as dating, but he didn't want to give an answer before he could consider the proposition in full, nor did he want to hurt Ino's feelings by responding carelessly. Shaking any thought of his fellow blonde from his mind, he opened the wooden doors and stepped into Jiraiya's office, sarcasm already rolling off his lips. What, you couldn't have remembered this when I was here? Oh, he paused, noting Tenten's presence, what are you doing here? Jiraiya cleared his throat, eyebrows furrowed in mild annoyance. I have a mission for the two of you. And no, I couldn't have told you earlier as I was trying to decide what the best course of action was. And you settled on us. I'm flattered, Jiraiya-sensei. So quickly, too. Quote. This is no joke, Naruto, warned the white-haired man, and the blonde quickly wizened up, realizing the severity of the situation. This is a follow-up to the intel you and Ino just brought back, and as we're dealing with Orochimaru and Oto, is highly dangerous. The Sannin sighed. You two will go to the land of hot water as a newlywed couple and try to learn anything you can about whatever is going on there. Naruto immediately balked at the idea. Jiraiya-sensei, I don't really think that I'm the best person for this type of mission. He just barely escaped the awkwardness of Ino's proposition, now he had to act like Tenten's husband. Where did he even start? No, it has to be you two. Why us? If this mission really is as dangerous as you say, shouldn't Anbu be doing it? Blue eyes darted over to Tenten, silently grateful for the support. Jiraiya sighed again, running a hand through his messy white hair. You're right, he admitted finally. I would prefer to use Anbu, but I don't feel like they're the best choice in this scenario. For one thing, the members of Anbu are typically older than you are, and one of the things I've learned in my life is that people underestimate the young. You'll be much less suspicious than any Anbu operatives I would send in your place, and not just because of that. Due to their assignments, Anbu agents have been trained to be less emotionally available, let's say, than shinobi in the normal forces like yourselves, and for undercover missions like this, I need people who can pretend to be civilians, which I think you'll be able to pull off better than them. He hesitated briefly before continuing, also, it's my intention to block your chakra so that you can avoid the detection of any senses in the area. Both teenagers blanched at that. Naruto reacted first. But without our chakra, we'll be sitting ducks. I'm aware, Jiraiya stated seriously, and I wouldn't task you, either of you, with this assignment if I didn't think you were capable of handling it. There are reasons I chose you too, not the least of which is that you're both Tokubutsu jonin in fields that typically don't need chakra to excel in. I would have liked to have your teammate Lee be your partner on this, since he's a talented taijutsu specialist, he added, nodding to Tenten, but given his exuberance, I didn't think an undercover mission like this would really fit him. The brunette gave a wry half grin. Probably not. Jiraiya nodded and continued, you also work together frequently enough that your relationship should be easy enough to fake without arousing suspicion, which obviously reduces the risk of getting caught. He paused briefly to allow him time to digest his reasoning, then, in a more sober voice, stated, you can refuse the mission if you so desire. This is highly dangerous, and I would understand your hesitation, but you should know that I consider you two the most qualified to carry it out. We'll do it, right, Naruto? The blonde bit down on his instinctual protest and, after a moment, nodded, albeit reluctantly. Jiraiya returned the gesture, expression solemn. Very well, Tenten, if you'll come here, I need to reply the seal. It needs a bit of room to reply, so if you could, he coughed here, as if to disguise some hidden agenda in his voice, lift your shirt please, yes, that's fine. Naruto turned away when his friend lifted her shirt to her sternum, revealing her back to the Sannin. The idea of going on a mission where he had no chakra, practically a requirement in his field of work, was not even remotely enticing, his, and Tenten's, skill with chakra-less combat aside, especially since the assignment itself had little to no substantial background info. Beyond that, the basis of the mission was far out of his comfort zone. He was okay with the subterfuge required for undercover jobs, but under the guise of a loving husband-wife couple. He wasn't sure he could pull that off, even with his fake spouse being Tenten, someone with whom he was comfortable around. The alternative, however, almost seemed worse, and the idea of trying to come up with an answer to Ino's question that wouldn't spark her temper or alter their status quo was daunting. He needed time to think, time to figure out what the correct path was, and avoidance certainly seemed like a good, temporary, strategy. Besides, the successful completion of such a difficult mission would look excellent in his personnel file, and would surely help shorten the timetable he was looking at to reach Jonin. His promotion to Tokubutsu Jonin, a position reserved for those who displayed exemplary skills in specific fields of expertise, had come as a pleasant surprise. With his endgame in sight, he was inspired to push harder and faster towards his goal, even if that path involved a little risk. All right, kid, your turn. Naruto turned and exchanged positions with the reclothed Tenten, shedding the forest green tunic he changed into following his last growth spurt. Lifting up the fishnet beneath, he turned around and gave his sometimes teacher access to his bare back. The man's large palm came to rest at the center of his spine after a number of seconds, and then Naruto felt a great emptiness in his body, as if something had left in a great whoosh of air. He dropped his shirt and threw his tunic back on as Jiraiya explained, the seal basically works like the Hyuga's Juken. Your chakra's still there, it's just been blocked in certain places to prevent you from accessing it, and thus senses from finding you. You leave in 3 hours, which should give you enough time to change your looks and come up with a backstory. I wish you luck. Both shinobi bowed to him and then left. Naruto remained contemplative on the way outside, musing over his new set of circumstances. There didn't seem to be any noticeable physical changes as he moved, but just knowing that his body had no way to access his chakra was disturbing. If they got in trouble while on the mission, he had no way of utilizing the Shinrabansho for escape, or the Dokugiri for protection, or any of his wind techniques, just his Bukijutsu prowess and whatever poisons he could carry on his person. And since they were supposed to be civilians, it probably wouldn't be all that much. The thought of not having any of his normal contingencies scared him, but when he turned to ask Tenten what her plan for protection was, she was already looking at him with a thoughtful furrow on her brows. Losing track of his original question, he instead asked, "What?" "Kiss me," came the reply. Naruto stared at her for a moment, expression blank, before finding his tongue again. "What?" Her hand latched around his bicep and she forcibly dragged him into a nearby alley. "Kiss me," she repeated. "Why?" "For the mission, obviously. You have about as much interest in dating as Neji does, which is none, by the way, which means that you're completely inexperienced with faking a relationship. That's why you thought you weren't a good choice, right? Oh, and you're an expert." The blonde snapped. She shrugged. "Kunoichi classes. Those things you take when you're, like, 9. Tenten rolled her eyes. "Yeah, but you take them again when you're about 15 or 16 as the missions you become eligible for broaden." When Naruto didn't have a response to that, nor seem any more inclined to acquiesce to the brunette's original request, she heaved a long-suffering sigh of, "Oh, for heaven's sake," grabbed him by the shoulders, and brought their lips together. Blue eyes went wide with surprise and all his thoughts jarred to a halt. For a moment, he experienced nothing but nervous disquiet. Then his brain function returned, and the blonde was left with trying to remember what to do from movies he'd seen and manga he'd read. By the time he thought he had something, his companion was pulling away, his lips felt strange, tingling with an unknown energy. You need practice, Tenten informed him. Practice. And we need supplies, she continued, ignoring his murmur. Come on, there's a clothing store nearby where we can get what we need. With that, she took off down the alley and into the busy street. Naruto followed her at a much more sedate pace. Practice, he repeated unsurely, his thoughts all jumbled together. Maybe he would have been better off facing Ino than taking this mission after all. LLL. 5 days later, the pair of disguised Konoha nin disembarked from their caravan at Yugakure. The slow journey through the forest and then into the flat expanse of the land of hot water had only served to remind Naruto of his own powerlessness on the mission, that he and his faux spouse had to travel by civilian means rather than the faster method of tree jumping/running. Tenten had been forced to remind him to keep a cheerful air during the ride, lest they arouse the suspicion of any of their traveling companions. Not that the blonde thought that was likely, especially given the extent of the disguises, but he could appreciate the air of caution. His wild, yellow mess of hair had been buzzed to an inch and then dyed a light brown. The whisker-like markings on his cheeks were hidden by makeup, expertly applied by his partner. Tenten's chocolate locks were out of the normal buns and pleated in a neat braid that nearly reached her waist. Both were clothed in clean but simple garments of brown cotton, long-sleeved shirts and pants meant to inconspicuously conceal whatever weapons they deemed necessary and capable of hiding. For his own part, the blonde had managed to strap his pair of long senbon to his forearms, with a package of smaller needles held in place by his belt. In the rucksack on his back were handfuls of poison pellets made to look like medicine stuffed in glass jars. It wasn't enough, in his opinion. Granted, they weren't expecting to see combat, but Naruto felt more naked than ever with the mediocre protection he had. And they were relying on his acting skills to get through this mission. He wanted to scoff at his own foolhardiness. Then again, he'd managed to convince the people close to him in Konoha of a myriad of different things over the years since Zetsu's influence had taken hold of him. He was definitely a better actor than he gave himself credit for, lack of experience in the field of romance notwithstanding. Besides, with Tenten's guidance he'd managed to survive the caravan trip, and even adapted a little more to his role of newlywed husband. Maybe there was hope for this mission after all. His partner tugged gently on his arm. Hiro-kun, let's go find a place to stay. I want to see the spas Yugakure is so famous for. Naruto quirked his lips into what he hoped was an endearing smile and entwined their fingers together. Sure thing, Kissa-chan. Why don't you lead the way? Tenten graced him with a smile that he felt was far more believable than anything he could muster. Okay. They meandered through the streets, both looking around at the sights but keeping weathered eyes and ears open for any sign of suspicious activity. The village hidden in hot water was a former ninja town turned tourist attraction, and for the first time since receiving the mission, Naruto felt that their civilian disguises were actually worthwhile. After stopping for lunch at an udon bar, the pair found an inn to stay at and drop off the packs. Tenten's made a muffled clattering noise as it hit the floor, but Naruto didn't say anything, merely raising an eyebrow at his partner. As they continued their exploration of the town, Naruto felt the tension in his body begin to ebb away. The weather was nice, his partner and fake spouse was someone he knew well and got along with, and no one was jumping them for being suspicious. For the first time in years, the Jinchuriki felt like a normal human, and not some unsocial, single-minded pariah with a mad scientist's experiment gone wrong for a mentor. He'd noticed it during the caravan ride, too, a strange calm that seemed to ease the tenseness of his mind and body in short bursts as he and Tenten had adapted to their roles. It was like she knew his fears and apprehension and could soothe them with her mere presence, a concept both terrifying and exhilarating. This time, when he smiled at the girl by his side, it was with a gentle tug of his cheeks, and Tenten, someone who was rough and tumble and tomboyish, whispered softly to him, "You should smile more often, Hiro-kun. It's nice." He squeezed her hand in response and, for the first time in 6 days, thought that it might not be such a bad thing to agree to Ino's proposition. When evening rolled around, Naruto found himself relaxing in one of the inn's multiple spas, head lolling back against the smooth rock ringing the pool's circumference. Back in Konoha, he typically avoided the hot springs due to the number of people that were there, which was certainly a part of why he'd felt so uncomfortable in the cramped caravan, but here the spas were built for only a few people in order to aid in quiet relaxation, and no one else was around, allowing him to soak in the rejuvenating waters in peace. If this was what life without responsibility was like, Naruto could definitely see the appeal. Sadly, he had a duty to perform while in Yugakure, and it wasn't going well. The people of the hidden hot water village appeared relatively pleasant and easygoing, and there weren't any areas that screamed, villainous hideout, for someone of Orochimaru's renown, either. Not that he'd expected the mission to be that easy or straightforward, but he'd certainly hoped for more of a clue than they'd found thus far. The groups of Oto Nin that he and Ino had found certainly hadn't bothered operating with much discretion. There was the hushed slide of the shoji door and the slightest slap of bare feet on wet stone. Naruto opened his eyes and felt a strange mixture of tension and relief at the sight of Tenten, a towel covering her from armpit to knee, walking towards him. "What are you?" he began, but the brunette put a finger to her lips, and he snapped his mouth shut. "Thanks for grabbing a spa, Hiro-kun. How's the water?" "Nice," he managed, acutely aware of only the towel wrapped around his waist. Tenten slipped into the spot beside him, letting out a content sigh as she did so. Their shoulders were touching, and Naruto got the distinct impression that his friend was being coy, even though she'd never acted like that in all the time they'd known each other. "Mission," he told himself, "it's just the mission. I was talking to the manager," she mentioned after several minutes. "He said that we shouldn't go out at night if we can help it. Remember how we saw everyone go inside around sunset?" The blonde nodded. Mothers had hurried the children indoors, and shops and restaurants had been closed and barred as the last of the daylight had faded to evening. Both Leaf Shinobi had found the behavior strange, but hadn't questioned it. "They've been having problems with kidnapping recently," Tenten continued. "At first it was just children, but when they started employing a curfew, adults began to disappear, too. Why haven't they hired any shinobi to figure out what's going on? The few that they have all disappeared. Dead?" he wondered, cocking his head slightly at his partner. Tenten shrugged, but her face said that it was the likely conclusion. "That's terrible," he said aloud, keeping their cover. Lifting an arm and placing it across the brunette's shoulders, he pulled her a little more into his side and added, "We'll have to be careful then." "What am I doing?" It wasn't even a question of how to act on the mission anymore, though it was weird that that gesture had seemed so natural. It was a matter of personal comfort. Naruto wasn't big on physical closeness, finding it a hindrance to his mobility or a threat to his person, but here he was, inviting someone close to him more on instinct than conscious forethought. He was as defenseless as he could be, chakra sealed off, no weapons, essentially naked, and yet, he drew some small measure of comfort from having Tenten next to him. She was looking at him with wide brown eyes, and when she moved to kiss him, he didn't resist. Whether that was a sign of his acceptance of the mission or something else, he didn't know, but Tenten's lips were gentle against his, a far cry from the rough, fed-up way she'd practiced with him in the alley. For the mission, he told himself again, but he sounded a little unsure even to his own mind. LLL. Over the course of the next several days, Naruto and Tenten spent their time exploring the village, whether by walking openly through it or clandestinely searching for any hint as to the supposed forces from sound. The blonde was beginning to wonder if the intelligence he and Ino had found was right, vague as it had been. They were also running out of time. A civilian couple could only stay in town for so long before arousing some manner of suspicion, or at least curiosity as to the prolonged getaway, and the window Ino had quoted was quickly coming to a close. The kidnapping problem would have to be brought to Jiraiya's attention, but it wasn't enough of a lead, nor was there any guarantee it was connected to their original mission parameters. It wasn't until the evening of their fourth night that they made progress. They were just getting settled in their room when a muted sound of revelry came from outside. Naruto peered through the window to spy a man who'd entered Yugakure earlier that day stumble down the street, clearly drunk. Aside from him, the place was deserted. He watched the man amble away into the darkness, and just when he was almost out of sight, there was a flicker of movement across the path, and he was gone. "Shinobi, grab your stuff," he whispered to Tenten. Within 5 minutes, they'd made it to the point where the man had disappeared, armed with what weapons they had uncloaked in the shadows. For a brief moment, Naruto wished that Ino was there to make tracking their target easier, or that he had access to his chakra, so he could use the green sight technique with any underground plants. But he shook off that thought and resigned himself to doing things the old-fashioned way. There was little point in wishing for what couldn't be. They followed a trail of vomited alcohol, dusty footprints, and disturbed gravel to a burned-out, multi-story building on the eastern edge of town. It looked like it had been opulent long ago, but jagged marks scored the facade, and there were splashes of spilled blood painting the edges of the door and window-less frames. The small house next door was a broken shell of charred timber, and likely the cause of the fire that damaged their target home. With no ability to access the roof from that, Naruto gestured to Tenten that they should sneak in via a missing window. He let out a quiet noise of disgust as a cobweb got tangled in his face and hair, glancing around at the darkened interior. It was just as dirty on the inside as it appeared on the outside. Naruto wondered how long the building had been abandoned as they swept quietly through it, looking for any sign of the missing foreigner. Tenten tapped his shoulder, and when his attention turned towards her, she pointed at a patch of floor that seemed to have accumulated less dust than its surroundings. He nodded, and they crept over to examine it, Naruto subtly checking for his senbon in the process. Well, looks like you two players found our secret level. Both Leaf Shinobi whirled on the spot, looking around for the owner of the voice. Naruto found him first, crouched in the rafters almost 15 feet overhead. He appeared to have thick, bushy hair tied in a style reminiscent of Shikamaru, and, more noticeably, 6 arms spread out wide in a gesture of welcome. Welcome to my parlor, said the spider to the fly, he continued. You guys seem pretty low level to have found this place, though I'll admit that if it wasn't for my spiderwebs, I probably wouldn't have found you. You don't really seem to have any chakra. The cobweb on the window, Naruto realized. It seemed like their opponent was, at least in some respect, a sensor type, using spider-like abilities to detect his prey. That somewhat explained the extra arms. Tenten latched onto his arm. Hiro-kun, we should leave. She wanted to play the beguiling civilian. Naruto was fine with that if it let them avoid combat. Why yeah, coming to explore this place was a bad idea. The multi-armed male chuckled. Oh ho, you think you can just leave? Orochimaru-sama said that we should expect Konoha in, but since you guys stumbled in here, you can join the others we've taken. It was a human trafficking ring, Naruto concluded, all the dots connecting together. Orochimaru had his henchmen kidnapping people, first children, then adults and tourists, from the hidden hot water village to use in his experiments. And he'd even expected interference from Konoha, likely a result of his loss of forces during the mission with Ino. A hand latched onto his left forearm. Beside him, Tenten jumped slightly as another grabbed her right. You wanted to see what was down there so badly, mocked a new voice in their ears. Now you can find out. No point in keeping cover anymore. Naruto subtly lobbed the pellet he palmed in his right hand behind him. Thick black smoke erupted around them, eliciting a surprised cough from their captor. Both shinobi wrenched themselves free from the man's loosened grip, Naruto unclasping his twin senbon from their braces. There was the sound of metal clinking, then the hard sound of 2 solid objects connecting. Tenten emerged from the smoke with a 3-foot bow staff. Where has she been keeping that? The blonde wondered, collapsible or not, that had to have been difficult to hide, clutched in her hands. One down. The ninja in the rafters laughed. Oh man, they got you good, Saken. There was a groan from within the dissipating smoke, then a figure with blue-gray hair rose from the floor, one hand rubbing the back of his. Is that a second head? Naruto thought in disbelief. Shut up, Kidomaru, he snapped. They got Saken, but we can still take out these 2 without his help. None of your usual fooling around, either, he ordered, dark marks crawling across his body and solidifying into a demonic visage with red skin. Civilians or Konoha nin, they hurt my brother. Whatever you say, Akon, Kidomaru agreed with amusement. Naruto took their moment of distraction to toss a handful of senbon at the multi-armed man. A handful of tink sounds rang out, followed by the clatter of metal falling to the floor. You'll need a stronger weapon than that, Kidomaru advised. My Nenkan no Yoroi can withstand anything you throw at me. Naruto scowled. Tenten was more of a melee fighter, so it was more up to him to defeat the spider-like shinobi, and with his needles ineffectual and his gaseous poisons unaided by any wind techniques, he wasn't sure he actually had a way to do so. It was for this exact reason he hadn't wanted to embark on a mission without chakra in the first place. You know, I think I saw these guys come into town a couple days ago. Yeah, we were gonna try to get but they kept going inside at night, remember? Never woulda guessed they were Konoha nin. Well, at least the seal worked, Naruto thought morbidly. Small consolation. Akon apparently agreed. Who cares? He snarled at his partner. From his periphery, Naruto could see his arms blurring in speedy punches that Tenten was barely managing to deflect in time with her staff. Take out this stupid bitch already, she's pissing me off. Tag in. Kidomaru chimed happily, vomiting a golden substance into his hands that hardened into spiky projectiles. Before he could do anything, Naruto unleashed a slew of smoke balls, obscuring the sound shinobi's view of the battlefield. Racing over to Tenten, he muttered to her, move, and then blocked Yukon's blind series of strikes as best he could. He took a hard blow to the shoulder in order to scratch the poisoned end of his senbon across Yukon's chest, but his reddish skin was tough, almost like armor, and the needle didn't draw blood. Stuck with only the limited supply of pellets he had left, he slammed two into the ground, filling the thinning haze with toxic green gas. With Tenten out of the way, and his own immunity to his poisons, he didn't have to worry about collateral damage. That won't work on me anymore, came a voice from right beside his ear. Naruto's head snapped around to look at his right shoulder, where the demonic visage of Akon was sprouting. In this form, I can merge with anyone I'm touching. Now, give me an antidote for that poison you just used on my brother, or I'll destroy your body on a cellular level. The blonde swung his opposite arm around to stab the Otonin in the eye with his senbon, but Akon grabbed the limb before it could get close. Try again, the red-skinned male taunted, and then blinding pain erupted somewhere in the area of the leaf shinobi's liver. Naruto had an instant to think that he was well and truly screwed, his normal contingencies lost with his locked chakra, before a new presence made itself known. Unlike the first two, this one seemed to boom loudly in his head, a specter only he could hear. Stupid child, allowing yourself to be placed in such a vulnerable position. One seal and one pest is quite enough. Something inside him broke, whatever chakra blocking seal Jiraiya had applied, the blonde guessed, and his body felt flooded with the strength and vitality he was used to, and then more. Akon screamed as red-orange chakra formed a cloak over their shared body and then entered the Otonin. He disconnected his body from Naruto's, his skin changing colors once more, this time to a mottled purple, as he staggered over to the prone body of his brother. Naruto wasn't sure what was happening, but with chakra flowing through his body once more, he wasn't going to question it. Flipping through hand signs, he then threw a handful of senbon in the brother's direction with a muttered, futon, senbon kage bunshin no jutsu, and then turned to see how Tenten was faring. The innumerable wind-tip needles would take care of Sakin and Akon, armored skin or not. His brown-haired teammate was surviving, but barely. She'd broken the bow staff into its 3 segments to better fend off the rain of spiders that were falling from the largest arachnid he'd ever seen, as well as trying to avoid the deadly projectiles being tossed at her. If it wasn't for the fact that she frequently dealt with plucking weapons out midair and expertly tracking her own with well-trained eyes, Naruto was sure she'd likely be dead already. 3 shadow clones popped into existence at his side, one disappearing through the floor with the attack prevention technique as he and the other 2 performed the same series of hand signs. Futon, K's no cape. He shouted, a strange aggression in his voice. Air blasted out from the hands of all 3 blondes just as the 4th clone grabbed Tenten's ankles and dragged her underground. Spiders and web flew towards the back wall in the blustery buffet, impacting it and causing it to collapse with a creak of splintering wood. Kidomaru, the rafters he had found perch in now unsupported, was blown away with his summons, tumbling outside amidst the zephyr. With nowhere for the spider-like shinobi to perch up high, and Naruto's chakra restored, the blonde was confident in his victory. Hey, looks like you found a power-up after all, commented the Otonin, his skin darkening and hair turning a dusty shade of gray, but it won't be enough. He threw the golden projectiles at the blondes before him, then vomited out a golden bow and arrow, taking aim at the one Naruto who hadn't burst into smoke. 110% accuracy, game over. The arrow sped through the air too fast for the Jinchuriki to dodge. He took it through the heart, only to explode into smoke just like his brethren. Kidomaru's eyes widened in surprise. What? Futon, Kuki no Sokubaku. Kidomaru tried to turn around at the voice behind him, but found all 6 of his arms and both legs pinned together, restricted by invisible chains. Futon, Shinkukyu. Holding his hands to either side of the Otonin's face, Naruto encased the entire man's head in a swirling sphere of wind chakra. His armor may have been vaunted as impenetrable, and as much as the blonde wanted to test that claim, he knew it wasn't pragmatic to do so right then, but the spider-like shinobi still needed to breathe. The vacuum sphere technique would deprive him of that right while his air shackles kept him immobilized. Soon enough, the sound shinobi was asphyxiated. Don't hate the player, Naruto offered the corpse, hate the game. He activated the Shinra Bansho and melded through the earth until he reached the basement where he deposited Tenten after switching places with his clone. Almost a dozen people had been locked up down there, all of whom were now freed from their bindings and staring at his brunette teammate with shock and gratitude. What happened? She asked him when he appeared. They're dead. Tenten shook her head. No, with you. Hokage-sama said the seal would prevent us from using chakra. Mine's still blocked, so how'd you get access to yours? Not sure. He had a strong hunch, but it wasn't something he really wanted to share. He would have to talk to Jiraiya upon their return. Let's just be grateful I got it when I did. So, she continued, looking at the gathered victims, I guess we should take these guys back to the village. Naruto sighed before creating one clone for each person. Scooping up Tenten into his own arms, his doppelgangers followed his example and then jumped to the now demolished first floor. Don't get used to this, he advised the brunette, before running back towards the village proper. It took just under an hour to arrive back in Yugakure, drop everyone off, pack up, and leave. Naruto resigned himself to carrying Tenten on the journey back due to her decreased speed and stamina, courtesy of Jiraiya's seal. After a day and a half of mostly silent travel, they reached Konoha's great gates and went straight to the Hokage's office, reporting to a contemplative Sannin the entirety of their mission. The white-haired man thanked them for their service and, after unsealing Tenten, informed them they'd have the next couple of days off to recover. Before being shooed away, Naruto was also told to return later that day, when Jiraiya was less busy, to discuss the circumstances under which the chakra-blocking seal had failed. The blonde let out a deep breath of relief upon exiting the Hokage Tower, glad to be back in his comfort zone. Between not having access to his chakra and the whole farce of his and Tenten's relationship, it was a wonder he hadn't had some sort of nervous breakdown over the course of the last 10 days. So, he began, turning to face his friend, what are you gonna do with your MMF? Tenten was kissing him again, hard and fierce and nothing like what he'd grown used to on their mission. It fit her personality better, he noted, somewhere deep in the back of his mind, but it was strange, because there was no need to practice, no pretenses to keep, no logical reason for them to be connected in this fashion. When she pulled away, he stared blankly at her with curious blue eyes. What was that for? She shrugged, a pleased smile on her lips. That was for me. Just felt like it. She took off jogging down the street, waving goodbye to him as she went. I'll see you later, Naruto. He shook his head as she left, severely confused and in dire need of a way to sort out his feelings. Fortunately, he knew just how to deal with that. LLL. Oi, Zetsu, I need to talk to you. He waited several seconds for a response, and when none came, impatiently added, I know you're out there. I can sense you now, remember. I liked it better when he was a brainless moron. Oh, don't say that, you'll hurt his feelings. Naruto-kun is still so sensitive. I'm not. He began in protest, but then closed his eyes and held up his hands in surrender. You know what? I don't care. And yet here you are. Relationships, the blonde stated loudly in an attempt to override his mentor. I've never been in one. Shocking, truly. And you think we have? Naruto frowned. Well, not now, obviously, but I thought, maybe when you were human. I feel like we should be offended, White Zetsu told his counterpart. Should we be offended? Yes. What a terrible thing to say, Naruto-kun. But I forgive you. I don't. And to answer your question, we were in the middle of a war, not much time for hugging and kissing. What is the point of this? The plant man's dark side interrupted testily. I just got back from a really weird mission, and it was just on my mind. His girlfriend probably proposed to him, or something equally stupid. Oh, congratulations, Naruto-kun. Did she make you change your hair? It looks kinda funny. Oh, Can I bring a +1? Idiot, I'm your +1. But I want someone who'll dance with me. It doesn't matter, we're not going. Party pooper. She's not my girlfriend, she didn't propose, and this is all beside the point, the blonde shouted. I think he's upset, White Zetsu stage whispered to his other half. Naruto sighed. He was starting to miss the days when Zetsu would call him an idiot and then lecture him, rather than having to suffer through the plant man's strange back and forth nonsense. It seemed there was a price to be paid for growing older and wiser after all. Look, I was just looking for some advice, but if you're gonna be all, he flapped his hand at the former grass shinobi, then I'll just. Relationships are merely distractions, Black Zetsu told him seriously. The Jinchuriki shut his mouth and waited for his tutor to continue. Kunoichi are sent on seduction missions because the tactics they employ are effective. Men stop using their brains and start using their head. White Zetsu giggled. Yes, to swear fealty to another for the rest of your life is no different than serving the leader of a hidden village. The priority becomes their needs, not yours. Well, Naruto pondered, searching for the other side of the argument as he'd been taught, finding both his and Zetsu's lack of romantic entanglements inadequate for his tutor's usual, rely on your own experience, philosophy. What about you? I mean, he continued at the plant man's bewildered expression, you have each other, right? That's like a relationship. Black Zetsu snorted. Forced symbiosis is hardly a strong basis for a pro-relationship argument. If we could permanently live apart, we would, his lighter half added solemnly. If you could find someone who completes you as wholly as we do, then maybe it would work, but no, shut up. Do not forget that false hope is the devil's plaything, he reminded the blonde. I do not believe you will find the answer you seek with us, so you should ask yourself this, does pursuing a relationship, the distaste of the word was clear in his voice, negatively impact your self-ascribed mission? Naruto lapsed into silent contemplation at that, turning the problem over from a different angle. The mission with Tenten had caused his perspective to shift from being unsure if he could function in a relationship to how to actually manage one. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of his original hesitation, as if it was a foregone conclusion that he'd start one. I guess Zetsu was right when he said men stop using their brains. Because as he thought about it, the answer seemed an obvious, resounding, yes. He sincerely doubted that Ino or Tenten would follow along with his goal, unless he was seriously misreading their characters, and so starting something that he couldn't finish was an ultimately pointless endeavor. The one trait Uzumaki Naruto had carried over from his younger days was his drive. If he sought to achieve something, he did it wholeheartedly, with no reins holding him back, whether it was the objective he'd set for himself or a theoretical relationship with one of the girls. His tenacity chasing Sakura in his youth was certainly telling enough to the latter point. He sighed to himself. When did he get so whimsy? Sex is fun, though. Naruto's higher brain function ground to a resounding halt. What? He spluttered aloud. Sex. White Zetsu chirped in far too chipper a voice. He had such a paltry education, it is likely he never learned about it. Oh, of course. Well, you see, Naruto-kun. No, he moaned mentally. No. When a man and a woman love each other very much, or are just seeking a cheap thrill, Black Zetsu interjected. Or two people of the same gender. Don't lie to the boy. Right, silly me. Well, when two people want to feel pleasure. No. This is not happening, he snapped at his mentor, pointing a finger at the renegade Kusanin. This conversation, he continued, flicking said finger between the two of them, no. He about-faced and began to march away, but a strangled yelp escaped his throat as a vine rose up and snared him about the chest, lashing his arms to his sides. Zetsu, let me go, you freaky bastard. He tried to activate the attack prevention technique, but the plant man seemed to anticipate his action and raised him into the air, away from any substance he could meld into. The Nukanen's chakra, more connected to vegetation than his and coursing through the vine, prevented him from manipulating the flora to his whim. Hush now, Naruto-kun, I'm trying to educate you. You can ask questions later. I don't need an education, and I don't want to hear about your exploits. Where has this vine been? He practically shrieked. The forest, came White Zetsu's innocent reply. It was only the one time, Naruto-kun, and I was human when it happened. Naruto's body went slack at that admission, a shiver of relief running throughout it. The idea of his tutor having sex, while disturbing, was far less so with that knowledge. The instant Zetsu had mentioned it, Naruto had had horrifying visions of dark, vegetation-inspired fetishes and white Zetsu's half-mouth leering insanely at some naked woman. It was just after the Third Shinobi World War had ended, the plant man continued dreamily. I don't remember who she was, but after I lost my parents, I needed a distraction from everything. Can you just skip the details, please? Naruto's voice was hollow, resigned to his fate. And please tell me there's a point to this story. White Zetsu's face morphed into the creepy expression the blonde recognized as a pout. Fine. It was very freeing. Afterwards, I felt very relaxed, like nothing could bother me. Oxytocin, Black Zetsu supplied. Serotonin. Dopamine. Anyway, the point is, you shouldn't knock anything, till you try it. The result may be different than you're expecting. Great, he muttered. Lesson learned, never ask you for advice again. Ever. Can you let me go now? I think we scared him. Good. Ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer. Relationships, Black Zetsu scoffed, can you imagine? Not anymore, Naruto thought sourly as Zetsu quarreled with himself, the vine holding him in place, dropping him to the ground. Where it had almost seemed like a pleasant thing to engage in, the idea of starting a relationship with either Ino or Tenten was now tainted by his tutor's story. Not that it really mattered too much, he supposed, it would have been nothing more than a distraction from his goal, a temporary reprieve from honing his skills for the battles ahead, and he couldn't afford any distractions. He sighed. Well, I guess I shouldn't have expected anything different. Briefly, he wondered if he hadn't sabotaged himself towards the idea by running to Zetsu for advice, but then he shook it off. It had been nice while it had lasted, but there was no use mourning lost opportunities. Oh, he looks so sad. I hope he signed a prenup. TCH, like he possesses the foresight to have done such a thing. The blonde shot his mentor a deadpan expression that somehow managed to convey a brief, scathing hatred. Why are you still here? Haven't you done enough damage for one day? It sounds like he's trying to get rid of us. And not very subtly, either. Very well, Naruto-kun, we'll see you around. Naruto waited until the plant man's strange chakra was out of his sensory range before heaving an exhausted breath and rubbing his temples. It was his fault for asking in the first place, but there was never any real way of telling what Zetsu would say. Still, at least he had an answer now. And the former grass shinobi was right about one thing: to gain the appropriate experience, everything should be tried at least once. He contemplated that for a moment, imagination running rampant with new ideas and possibilities, before the image of Zetsu's grinning half-mouth loomed in his vision, vines thrashing about his form like demonic whips in a parody of a masochist's wildest dream. Aaggghh. His hands flew through seals before coming together in the sign of the snake. The ground began to shake, and then a nearby tree fell through the earth as if it was made of water instead of dirt. 3 more followed, and then Naruto's fingers twisted twice more, and the holes that had swallowed up the plants closed with a shuddering groan and splintering bark. He breathed heavily in the ensuing quiet, finding a small measure of peace in the wake of his wanton destruction. Only one thought niggled in the back of his mind. After all this time, I think he finally managed to scar me for life. LLL. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.